At 250 hours, replacement of the cam gear is necessary. Note: older manuals show the aluminum cam gear as a 500-hour RCO. Mandatory Compliance Bulletin M14, dated January 2, 1997, requires you to change your maintenance manual to 250-hour RCO for the aluminum cam gear. If you received your engine after June of 1999, you may have the new style steel cam gear. If this is the case, verify the engine serial number with Rotorway customer service. The steel cam gear will remain at 250-hour RCO. When the aluminum cam gear is replaced with a steel cam gear, it is also necessary to replace the mating gear located on the crankshaft. This procedure can be performed with the engine installed in the helicopter. Removal of the heat shielding will be required. The engine will need to be supported with straps the same way as shown earlier in the maintenance video series when inspecting the rubber ring in the lower engine mount. Disconnect the oil lines and oil temperature sensors from the lower engine mount cover. Be prepared for some oil to drain. Then, drain the oil from lower cover by removing the drain plug. We will demonstrate the rest of this procedure with the engine removed from the helicopter. If you decide to remove the engine from the airframe, refer to the 1,000-hour service interval in the maintenance video series for engine removal procedures. Fabricate an engine bench stand as shown to support the engine while it's on its back side. Follow these procedures for the aluminum cam gear replacement. Remove the 5/16" bolts attaching the lower engine cover to the case. Do not remove the oil pump cover from the lower cover. Leave it bolted together as a unit. Remove the lower cover by using a piece of wood as a pry bar between the oil drain fitting and the engine case on the pilot side and the upper oil line fitting and water jacket on the passenger side. This is necessary to break the silicone seal. Inspect the top part of the oil pump shaft for any signs of wear. Call customer service should you discover any noticeable wear. In the same way as when measuring the valve lash, rotate the engine backwards to position the crank gear key so that it lines up with the front split line of the engine case. The camshaft should now be positioned with the oil pump drive slot pointed approximately at the 11:30 clock position, with one of the 3 attachment bolts positioned towards the front of the engine. If the gears do not line up as described, try rotating the crankshaft gear another 360 degrees. Caution: it is imperative from this point on that the camshaft and crankshaft remain in this position. Even the slightest movement can cause timing problems and possible engine damage. Remove the 5/16" socket head cap screws holding the cam gear to the camshaft, one at a time. Before removing the last bolt, verify that the camshaft and crankshaft have not moved. Carefully remove the cam gear. It should remove without any excess force. During the assembly process of the engine, the crank gear was installed on the end of the crankshaft by heating the gear to expand the bore for a tight fit. A relief hole must be drilled in the crank gear for its removal. Remove the retaining ring from the end of the crankshaft with a couple of screwdrivers. Drill the hole between the top of the crank key and beveled gear teeth shown here, usually a 3/16" drill bit. Use extreme caution when drilling the relief hole through the old crank gear, as the main bearing is in close proximity. Use a drill stop to control drill bit depth. Use a caliper to determine the position of the drill stop. Use a piece of shim stock placed between the gear and the bearing to protect the bearing surface. Use a tapered punch to split or crack the old crankshaft gear. Remove the gear and clean the area. Before installing the new crank gear, verify the crankshaft gear key is seated correctly. Inspect to make sure it is positioned to allow the installation of the new gear. For proper installation, the new gear will need to be heated to a temperature between 500 and 800 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat the new crank gear evenly as shown. Look for a color change in the area where the black coating has been removed to be brown or purple in appearance when heated to these temperatures. Quickly position the gear on the end of the crankshaft and seat into position. If the gear becomes too tight before being fully seated, then use a large socket and hammer to lightly tap into position. The keyway slot marked with an O should be the one used to position over the key. Be sure the beveled edge of the gear faces toward the bearing. Modify a pair of snap ring pliers to install a retainer ring. Be sure the ring seats properly. The replacement cam gear can be installed in several different positions. Pick the position where the bolt holes best line up to prevent the camshaft from rotating when tightening the bolts. There must not be any movement of the camshaft as the bolts are tightened. Do not reference these timing marks marked on the timing gear to position the gear. In some applications, it may be necessary to slightly elongate the holes for the best bolt alignment. Look at the old cam gear to see if the holes were elongated. If they were, it may be necessary to elongate the new cam gear holes to match the fit. After finding the correct position, clean the threaded holes in the camshaft with cotton swabs and acetone and install each bolt snug. Do not over-tighten. Remove one bolt at a time and apply red Loctite number 271 to the threads. Reinstall the bolt and torque to 18 foot-pounds. Repeat this procedure with the other two bolts. Paint or make an index mark on the camshaft gear tooth that is positioned between the marked teeth of the crankshaft gear as shown. Remove and replace the old oil galley O-ring. Clean all the silicone from the mating surfaces of the engine case and the lower cover. Remove the oil in the lower cover and wipe it clean. Apply lithium grease to the teeth of both gears. Keep the mating surfaces of the case free of this grease. Apply a small amount of RTV 735 silicone sealant to the main oil galley O-ring groove in the case to help hold the O-ring in place. Apply a small bead of silicone to the engine case around the perimeter. Avoid excess sealant around the O-ring sealing area. Rotate the oil pump shaft and the lower cover to align with the camshaft slot. Install the lower cover, locating the dowel pins on the dowel sleeves. It may be necessary to tap the cover into place with a plastic hammer. Caution, do not use excessive force when hammering the cover in place. If the cover does not tap into place easily, check the alignment of the oil pump shaft and cam slot. Install the bolts. Torque the bolts to 15 foot-pounds. Wipe away any excess silicone sealant. Reinstall the engine. Refer to the 1,000-hour service interval for the engine replacement. Replenish the engine oil and remember to prime the oil pump before starting. Refer to the engine manual for more information on oil pump priming. Wait a minimum of 10 hours before starting the engine to allow time for the silicone and Loctite to dry. Note, on initial startup after installing the steel gear, you may notice more noise than normal coming from the bottom of the engine. This is normal, and as the new steel gears break in, this noise will dissipate.